This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlon, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Kristina Kuzmic was born in Croatia and is a world-renowned speaker known for her unique insight and humor on family-related topics. She's also an author, comedian, and mental health advocate. She joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss her life and latest book, I Can Fix This and Other Lies I Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Kristina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kristina, I'm excited to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Oh gosh, I guess I was always a storyteller in a way. Like I was always one of those kids that very openly, too openly for some adults' comfort, talked about my feelings and the things I've been going through and the things that I was curious about. Never actually thought I would write a book, especially because, as you mentioned, I grew up in Croatia. English is my second language. Um, and then, yeah, I guess the storytelling continued as my life got complicated. I decided to share in order to help others feel less alone.
Well, I do want to dig into all of that, but I'm curious because I did read, the words mental health advocate and comedian. I'm curious, tell me about the comedy, because I've done a little bit more than dabble on stage, but I'm curious as to when comedy came into your life.
I mean, my whole career sort of started actually as comedy unintentionally. I started off years ago by making cooking videos because I love cooking, but it was just a hobby. This was before like TikTok. This was before anybody was becoming famous with online videos. This was just on YouTube, and each one was done in a really fun, funny way. Because for me, as I actually mentioned in my first book, going through life without comedy, without humor, is kind of like trying to eat soup with a fork. You're gonna miss out on so much if you can't find the funny. And so, anyway, it everything I created always had sort of a comic twist to it. And then eventually, through posting more funny videos, more about parenting and mental health eventually, it led to a comedy tour. And I found myself on stage and being called a stand-up comedian, even though I to this day don't call myself that. It feels weird. So yeah, I guess I'm an accidental comedian.
Kind of fell into it. It's funny because most comics I know, stand up specifically, they start with the open mics and then you do your bringer shows and then maybe you get to open up for somebody and middle and then eventually headline after 10 years or so. But it seems like you went kind of um, right to performing pretty quickly, not necessarily going that, you know, bring 10 people to the show and we'll give you 5 minutes kind of thing.
Yeah, and I part of that was never on my like bucket list. That was never one of my dream careers is I want to be a comedian. So after my videos online started going viral, I just got offered a tour and I at first said no because I had kids and in my mind a tour meant I was going to be living on a bus for months and months. And then they were basically said you can pick your own schedule. You can be gone for a day here and then months off and a day there. They sort of made it ideal for me. Thankfully, thankfully, and no one asked me if I had any experience on stage. They just threw me out there. But thankfully, my degree, I have a BA in theater, specifically theater performance. So I did have experience on stage. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. It might have been real ugly.
Yeah. Well, I know that the book that I referenced before was not your first book. I do want to kind of go back to the first book and kind of start there. What prompted you to even think about writing a book?
So, as I started sharing, basically, like I said, my videos just started being more funny, lighthearted. And then as I was sharing these videos, I got a lot of comments and emails from people who were saying, I'm really struggling. I just went through a divorce, or I'm a single mom on food stamps, or I'm going through a serious depression. And thanks for making me laugh. And the more I was getting these comments, I thought, my gosh, these people don't even know the hell I've been through. And some of them will not post it publicly. They'll email me because they're embarrassed to admit that they're either struggling with mental health or they're on food stamps or whatever. And so then I sort of decided to put myself out there against somebody's advice in the business was like, they were like, stay funny. You need to just stay in your box. Don't try to be serious now. But I went against that and just posted a real vulnerable video talking about how I'd gone through a divorce and on food stamps and sharing a small room with my kids and worrying about being homeless. And that just sort of opened this, I don't know, it almost like gave permission to people who were embarrassed by their circumstances or by their struggles to be open about it. And that's sort of what led to the book is that the more I talked about this stuff, the more people were like, tell me more, tell me more. And you can't tell these long life struggles and stories in a short video. And so that's sort of where the first book came from.
Yeah. So just thinking about the vulnerability
Yeah.
that was required for you to even start those videos and just kind of pouring your heart out there. How did you wind up in a situation where, you were kind of on food stamps and kind of you probably worrying, like really worrying about what the future was going to bring for you and your kids?
Yeah. So my kids were 1.5 and 3 when I left my first marriage. And I just wanted to leave without any drama. I just like, there were a lot of people who were like, you can't be divorced. You're going to ruin your kids' lives. You're divorced. And I just knew I was making the healthy decision. So I left without asking for any child support, asking for anything. I just left. And I had been a stay-at-home mom, and so suddenly I was, going to restaurants and trying to get a job waiting tables and, living in Los Angeles, which is very expensive. So we ended up just sharing a small room. I couldn't even afford an apartment just for us. We shared a small room and I had a roommate in the other room and, ended up on food stamps, ended up actually working 3 part-time jobs at the time. Never back then thought someday I'll be a published author or someday people will actually care to hear what I have to say. I was sort of among my community, I was looked at not that they would have said this, but I'm using the word, or I felt like a loser at the time, right? Like I'm the one that, my mental health is messed up and I have no money. And so it's very weird how life surprises us, sometimes in the worst ways and sometimes in the best ways.
Yeah, and it's almost as if maybe this is like a hindsight is 2020 type thing. But I know that one positive way to reframe some of those negative experiences is to look back and say, you know what, this didn't happen to me. This happened for me.
Yeah.
And have you been able to do that? I mean, is that a way that you might go about thinking things, and in what ways may have that happened for you?
I mean, it definitely sort of gave me the passion and the even whether it's career wise or even in my personal life that I have. I sort of have this mission statement for my life and my career, which is to be for others what I needed when I was at my lowest. And I think sometimes as a human, unfortunately, we have to hit that low point in order for our best and our biggest to sorry, my daughter is trying to FaceTime me from college. So yeah, here's the thing, here's why I struggle with those kind of sayings. The only reason I struggle with them is I can't tell a mother, for example, who just lost her child to cancer, "Well, this happened for you," So I try to be a little sensitive around those. If I'm talking about my life personally, would I recommend anyone else go through that kind of stress and, struggle? No. But when life does throw those awful things our way, we have 2 choices, right? We're either gonna take that and, you know, use it to help someone else feel less alone and use it to drive us towards our next goals, or we're just going to sit in it. And so I guess I decided to not just sit in it.
Yeah. So let's talk about again going back to that first book. What was the writing process for that? Like, kind of, imagine maybe you never tackled anything, as audacious as writing a book before. What was the process like? How did you keep yourself motivated? And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just
I
picking
mean,
up.
it was overwhelming because the one insecurity I'm still working on at times, it comes and goes, is that English is my second language. And also, I was one of those kids that was very, even in Croatia, I was very creative. I was, outgoing and wasn't one to like sit and study nonstop. So I felt stupid when I was a kid, is what I'm trying to say. And so combine that with, you know, trying to write in a new language and then trying to write about something so vulnerable and knowing that people who are really struggling are going to be reading this. There's just a lot of insecurities that came out and they were keeping me stuck. And so I was like, this isn't even like normal, writer's block. Like this is, I got to deal with my own crap here to get through this. So I found the process really torturous, to be honest. I did not enjoy it at all. Finally, when I got through like the awful rough draft, I was able to sort of find some sort of joy in it. But I swore after that first book came out that I would never write another book. And I hear that a lot of authors say that after the first book. And then they write another one. So yeah, I think it was a combination of my own insecurities and then also, when you write about something, you're going to be attacked for it. Like when you're vulnerable, you're going to be attacked. Period. And at that time, thankfully now I'm in a better place. At that time, I still struggled with being able to separate my value and my worth from other people's opinions. Um, Thankfully I got there by the second book because the second book is way more vulnerable.
Well, how did you get unstuck during that first book? How did you overcome those, insecurities you were feeling and those hurdles that you were kind of up against?
I mean, I had a really supportive, I was with Penguin Random House, had a really supportive editor and team. And two, I just kept sort of every time I felt like I can't do this, this is gonna be stupid or whatever, I kept going back to that mission statement I set for myself, right? To be for others what I needed when I was at my lowest. And in anything, whether it's writing or speaking or any of part of my career, that's always sort of been a way to center me, center myself. And so something I actually highly recommend for anyone to have a mission statement for your life, for your career, because in those moments when you do feel stuck or you start going, what's the point? Um, it just helps center you. It just really, that's really what it kept. I actually ended up writing it down on a piece of paper in my bedroom where I did most of my writing and just kept looking at it and going, okay, that's the whole reason you write. You're not writing this because you want people to think you're a great writer or because you want to hit a certain number of sales or whatever. This is why you're writing it. And that sort of takes away all the pressure and the ego melts and then securities kind of, quiet down a little bit.
Now, you bring up a really interesting point, which is, I think it's a misconception that writing is always a solitary or lonely activity. And of course, there is the time and a place for that because when you write, you're reflective, you're alone most of the time. But there's this point where it does become collaborative when you're working with your agent, when you're working with your editor and your publisher. I think the best books are ones that did have some kind of collaborative piece to them.
Yeah.
And it's a misnomer to say people are not going off on to desert islands and writing. It doesn't happen in a vacuum necessarily like that. For I think for most people, I don't want to paint with
Yeah.
too broad a brush here, but having a collaborative relationship with the other stakeholders of your book, your publisher, your editor, even beta readers,
Yeah.
is important.
Oh my gosh. I never could have done this without an entire team. I have so much respect for people when they're like, I'm self-published and I didn't even have an editor. And all I could think about is, how are you mentally right now? Because I needed so much support and help and being pushed and being, I remember I would write a chapter and my editor would respond with just like three really deep questions. And I go, oh crap. Okay. This chapter is about to completely change. I didn't even think of these things. And then also, aside from the professionals helping me, the amount of time I spent with my closest friends who, for example, with the first book, had walked with me through all those days, knew me. I remember sitting in my backyard for hours with my best friend at the time and just asking him, like, okay, what do you remember from that time? And then processing what I was feeling. And I mean, all that stuff really helped bring the book to light. I never could have done it isolated.
Yeah. Now I know you mentioned, finishing book one and maybe thinking to yourself, "I'm never gonna do this again," which is usually what I say after I run, like, a marathon or half marathon. It's like, I'm never gonna put my body through this torture again. But you do wind up writing a book too, and, usually I think what many people learn is, "Hey, I was able to do it once, I can do it again," right? So you kind of overcome that hurdle, but you're also so much more better at writing having done the first one and having gone through the process, and a lot of people tell me that, and I know this from my own experience, the subsequent books come out a little bit faster. I mean, they come out of you a little bit faster. You're just a better writer. Um, what did you take from the first experience of writing your first book and apply to I can fix this and other lies I told myself while parenting my struggling child?
So while I was writing the first book, someone gave me the best advice, which was decided the first draft is supposed to suck. Just decide it's supposed to suck. And that way there's no pressure, right? And I couldn't really fully, give into that the first time around. But the second time, I really was like, you know what? I tortured myself over that stupid first draft. And it that's what kept me stuck, right? Instead of just getting it all out there. And so with the second one, I really decided the first draft is supposed to suck. If it's brilliant, I did something wrong. And that just allowed me to completely write, like not worry about how bad it sounds or the grammar or whether it's the right analogy, just put it out there. And then working on that rough draft actually was enjoyable because now I felt like I was almost like playing. Do you know what I mean? Like I was fixing it and making it prettier and adding more emotion or adding more details. So I would say that's probably something if I ever write a third book, which right now I'll tell you no. Um, I will definitely continue to. I think that's one of the best things. And then also realizing, I think with the first book, everything felt like pressure. Every sentence mattered. It's like I was overthinking everything. By the second book, I realized this thing is gonna go through at least 3 drafts, if not more. It doesn't matter right now. Like, just it can wait. I just kept telling myself, "This can wait." I can't come up with a perfect analogy for what I'm trying to say. It can wait. It can wait. It can wait. Because I think it's the pressure. I think it's that pressure that actually keeps writers stuck. And if you can do everything you can to remove the pressure and just write as if no one's it's like they say, "Dance like no one's watching." Write as if no one's gonna read it. That's when your best stuff is gonna come out.
Yeah, I mean, that's sage advice. And the first draft, will not be the final draft,
Yeah.
right? I'm not going to say it's going to suck, but it's not going to be as good as what the final result will be.
Yeah.
And that's something that everybody has to face. And you might have to put your ego in check if you think your first draft should be perfect, because no one's first draft is perfect.
Yeah, and you know what I found is that by giving myself permission for the first draft to suck, it actually ended up sucking a lot less, if at all, compared to what it would have been if I had written with that pressure. Do you know what I mean? Because it was so much more raw. So you actually end up with a better draft if you tell yourself it can suck.
Yeah. I know, you mentioned that this book required more vulnerability. You're much more vulnerable in this book. What can you share with us about this book?
So, like I said, I was never going to write another book, and I was completely at peace with that. And during the writing of the first book, my oldest son had already been struggling with mental health struggles. But I have this agreement with my kids that I will not post anything about them publicly, whether it's online or in a book or say in a show, a comedy show, whatever, without their full permission. So I never thought we would be talking openly about my son's suicidal ideation and mental health struggles and hospitalization, all the stuff my family was going through. And then eventually he was almost 18 when he said, "Mom, what helped me and he's a very private person. What helped me the most, Mom, in my healing journey was support groups and hearing from other kids my age that, they're going through the same thing and they're having these same thoughts. And suddenly I didn't feel weird or weak or whatever. And so he agreed to do a video with me where he didn't want it planned. He didn't want me to tell him anything I was going to ask him. He said, I just want to sit down and we can just have a raw conversation. And we had this 2-hour conversation that we ended up cutting into a 20-minute video where he had just turned 18 when we did the video. He so openly talked about all of his struggles and even how his, mental health struggles showed up as violence and anger and, awful behavior towards me. He was just so vulnerable in it. And so when that video came out and the response was so huge, because again, all these families are like, oh my gosh, you're literally talking about this thing that we're keeping secret and we're feeling shame about and we shouldn't. That's sort of what led to the second book. And it felt a lot more vulnerable because I felt like, even though my son obviously I never would have done it without him, and he said, yes, let's do this, it still felt like I can handle the criticism and the hate and the whatever. I'm, in my 40s and I'm used to it by now. But do I want to put this kid who's just gone through all these struggles and is finally doing a little better? Do I want to put him through that? And he just kept reassuring me, like, no, I think this is important. I think this is going to help a lot of people. So he actually wrote the last chapter. We hear from a mother who's struggling and lost and trying to figure out how to support her son. And then you hear directly from the teen. And that just felt so, it kept me up at night. It felt too vulnerable. And I think it was just me in fact, the day the book came out, I freaked out. Like I had a little bit of I don't know if it's a panic attack or what, but I freaked out and I texted my therapist and I was like, do you have any time, even if 5 minutes, I need to meet with you today. I'm not well. And I had a, Good Morning America interview coming out. I had like all these publicity things I had to do. And inside I was freaking out. And really what I realized is I felt like I was exposing something that I couldn't protect. And that was my son. I couldn't protect how the world would see him or treat him after this book came out.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. It is beautiful, and just hearing his story, his struggles, and how sort of just even announcing them, verbalizing them, and sharing them was part of his healing.
Yeah.
It is powerful, and it is testament to the power of words and the power of sharing and the power of vulnerability, and then having other people hear that story and then say, "Oh my gosh, you know what? This is happening in my life."
Mhm.
And it gives them, um, license to share. And next thing you know, people are feeling better about themselves. I think we as a culture um, hold stuff in,
Yeah.
and especially, I can speak from like a guy's perspective, but we're not supposed to be emotional. We're not supposed to, because that's a sign of weakness, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to hold that in. We're supposed to be tough. My mother would say, Michael, offer it up for the souls of purgatory. Don't talk about your suffering. And which I always found to be a little different.
Right.
But I'm like, Mom, you're telling me that I can't complain about something, or if I'm going through a hard time, I should just offer it up for people who are already dead. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
What's it's
And the truth is, like, suppressing our feelings, our pain, our struggles has never led to healing. Like, we know this. We've seen it through generations. Suppressing does not lead to healing. And so, even while I was writing the book, so I made sure he was involved in all of my chapters as well, because if I wrote, for example, Luca was nervous, or Luca was angry, I wanted to be genuine to what he was actually feeling, not just my assumption. And there were certain times when I was writing where I would say, because it got to a point with his mental health. I had to call the police on him. There was just a lot of stuff that I kept saying to him, we can leave this part out. Like, we don't have to, and every time I was sort of worried about protecting his privacy and how much should I write about that awful thing you said or did when you were struggling? Every single time his response was, Mom, write it. If we're going to do this, let's just do it honestly. Write it. And which obviously made me nervous, but I wrote it. I wrote it all. And then he wrote it all in his chapter. He was very honest. And what's cool is the feedback, especially I'll tell you one specific story. This woman sent me a message. She said she read the book And she has a teenage daughter, I can't remember the age, maybe 15 or so, who's really, really depressed, but would not talk to her parents about it. But it was very obvious. She wasn't eating as much. She was isolated from her friends. The parents were really worried. So the mother one evening says to her, "Hey, I just read this book, and the last chapter is written by a teenage boy who's really struggling. So, you should check it out if you want. You can hear directly from a kid." And the daughter just sort of, blew her off or whatever. And this woman wrote me how the next morning, I could cry. The next morning, she walked into the living room and she saw the daughter reading my son's chapter. And she said later that day, she came to my husband and me, and she finally, for the first time, opened up about how she was depressed and that she needed help. And we were able to, you know, get an appointment with a therapist and actually start getting our daughter help just because she read that chapter, and it made her feel, less alone and more understood. And when told my son that about that email, he just kind of teared up and he went, "Mom, it was all worth it." Because I know I kept telling you to just write it all. But there was a part of me inside that was a little nervous about it. And this just makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
And, you know, like
Yeah.
what's more powerful than if telling your story out loud can possibly save someone's life? Like that, there's nothing more powerful.
No, not at all. Um, I used to think the hardest words in our language to say were "I love you," and now I realize like the hardest words that people can mutter is "I need help."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I mean, this is a great vehicle for helping people voice that. So that it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So I know this is your second book, and you mentioned probably not doing a book three, but come on, tell me what's book three going to be about?
I mean, it's funny I say that, and then every once in a while, just randomly in passing, tell my husband, "So I have this idea for one of the chapters in the next book." And he's like, "Wait, there's the next book? A few hours ago, you're saying there will never be another book." Um, so there's a part of this book, the new one with my son, where I really started realizing that I was bringing a lot of unhealed parts of myself into parenting. And by the way, unhealed parts that I thought were healed. Oh, I've talked about that in therapy. I've dealt with that. I'm good. That you don't even realize how unhealed they are until your child's behavior or, illness or whatever really triggers you. And all of a sudden, all this stuff appears and you cannot support your child in the best way because you got your own crap that you need to fix first in order to get rid of the ego and insecurities and the anger and all that stuff. Right. And so I touched on it in this one, but the more I've worked on that myself and the more I've seen progress, not just in my own joy and mental health, but in my relationship with my children, I think that's something that might be interesting to explore in another book.
Yeah, well, there you go. So now we'll look for that next year. Uh,
Or in 10, or in
Or
10. I like 10.
10's a good number.
Yeah.
10's your publisher, not so much. They probably want it quicker.
Yeah.
Well, one way I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is by throwing a couple pop culture questions at them. So, Christina, I'm curious, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV, if anything?
Oh gosh. So growing up in Croatia, well, it was Yugoslavia at the time. There were two channels, TV channels. You spoiled Americans. One was all day, and the other one was only in the evenings. And there was this is gonna make me sound like such like a poor little foreign weird kid. There was one cartoon that was played a day. That was it. At 7:15. I remember it. Every evening there was a cartoon, and I would wait all day to get to watch that one cartoon. And then when I was in high school, I moved to America, and I'm hearing these kids who are watching dozens of cartoons every Saturday morning. You spoiled brats. So, yes, that was my childhood.
I mean, would we know the cartoon or was it like super,
Well, Smurfs were really big there at the time. Tom and Jerry, all the good 80s,
yeah.
90s.
The Smurfs, I have a problem with because the math doesn't add up to me, right? I mean, if they procreate the way, most people do, one female Smurf and 99 male Smurfs, although who is it? Vanity, the jury's out on. But I don't get like how that like how are there so many Smurfs with just and Smurfette? I mean, if we really want to dig into it, wasn't Smurfette created by Gargamel to be like a plant or something so he can get into and first of all, what was his beef with the Smurfs anyway? Like why was he such I don't get it. I don't
This
know
will
why
be
the
your
cat
book. I think this should be your next book.
yeah, I don't know.
Analyzing. I mean, somebody was obviously doing some heavy drugs when they wrote the Smurfs. Let's just be honest.
Oh, look, there's mushrooms. Oh, they live under mushrooms,
Yes,
right? I mean,
there was heavy, heavy drugs involved. But the
oh,
7-year-old me couldn't get enough.
yeah. You know what? I mean, if you said Gilligan's Island, I was going to go off on a tangent about, the professor could make, he could power a radio from an exercise bike, right? And coconuts, but he can't fix a hole in a boat. Like it doesn't, if you
Wait,
think about these things, they don't add up.
you ready to really judge me?
No, of
Never
course.
seen a single episode of that show. They didn't play it in Croatia, and by the time I moved to America, it was no longer a thing, really. I mean, I know people watch it, as like I've never seen a single episode, so I feel like they should revoke my American citizenship now.
Maybe,
And if
maybe. But you bring up a question I should have asked, which is when did you move to America from Yugoslavia?
So it was my freshman year of high school. So when I was 12, the war started, like Yugoslavia basically separated, Croatia became independent. And then when I was 14, my family moved to the States. So I was like the dorky foreign kid with a thick accent. I had just been through war. So, I mean, honestly, I didn't even see most like my friends that were stuck back there because I hate even saying a bit, that I was there because we got to leave. But, I'd be in like my high school English class in America and a textbook would fall off the desk. And I would immediately have like a reaction because the loud noise, and so I just was a dork that got made fun of a lot. It took me, and then I found theater where all weird kids are accepted. So that was my saving grace.
Theater, it saved me. I mean, man, I used to be a very introverted person, which is hard for anyone in my social circles to believe right now. But I was, but theater really helped me. I mean, it just drew me out.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. It gave me confidence. They're like, we love your accent. You can play a weird witch because weird witches can have accents. Right.
yeah, I mean, it may have given me confidence I shouldn't have had, but it it gave me confidence nonetheless. What about music? What did you like listening to growing up?
So, a lot of Croatian music, which you wouldn't know, but then, like, Sinead O'Connor, like, a lot of those European artists, Set, um, Beatles, ABBA, a lot of those were big. New Kids on the Block, very big in Croatia.
New Kids on
The
the Block.
late '80s, very big. I just, at 45, got to see them in concert for the first time, so that was a big thing for me. Actually, I have this, like, emotional attachment to New Kids on the Block that people don't understand. Because my older sister and I were watching the New Kids on the Block video, which again, with Croatian TV, it's very rare, like, at the time that you would even see anything fun on TV. It was always, like, news or whatever. And so they were playing music videos, and it was step by step. It was, I think, one of the first times it was on TV, and my sister and I are watching it when we heard the first grenade hit our city. And then my dad the next thing we hear is my dad and my mom running down the stairs screaming at us, "Get down on the ground, get down on the ground." And so we're all on the ground in the living room, and my dad is trying to explain to us that a war is starting, and in the background, "Step by step." And so to this day, that song is like has this, I don't know, a special place in my heart of like, "Oh, yeah, that was a big moment in my childhood."
So they did hang tough, right? That was New Kids.
They did. They did.
So
Yeah.
and I remember Donnie Wahlberg was in New Kids on the Block. I was just rewatching. Did you ever watch Band of Brothers? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure like war is not something that you care to watch on
Yeah.
TV,
Whatever.
but I was rewatching it. I never the first three times I love the series. The first few times I saw it, I didn't pick up on this. At the end of I don't know one of the final episodes, um, Donnie Wahlberg looks at somebody and says, "You got to hang tough." And I went upstairs. I'm like, Nicole, my wife's name is Nicole. I'm like, oh my God, I just picked up on something I never picked up on before. Donnie Wahlberg gives a New Kids on the Block nod in Band of Brothers. She's like, "You woke me up for that." I'm like, it
Is
seemed
there
really
anything more
important to me.
important to wake you up for? When my husband surprised me, this was just a month ago, 2 months ago, and took me to my first New Kids on the Block concert after knowing what an impact they had on my childhood. He got me the meet and greet, and
Oh,
I'm going to the meet and greet, and Donnie, and thankfully I have this on video, and you can read his lips. Donnie goes, "By the way, I follow you," and I almost peed myself, and I checked on Instagram, and he's following me. So that was crazy for that 12-year-old girl who was watching his music video, years ago in Croatia.
well, yeah. I mean, that part of self is still there, though. That 12-year-old Christina is still inside you. So
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
should absolutely celebrate that.
Yeah.
As a wrap here, I always like to add the save the hardest question for last, which is, if you can go back in time and give your younger self, the younger Christina, any words of advice, what would you tell your younger self?
Gosh, this could be a fourth book. Um, there's so much, but the first thing and the biggest thing that comes to mind right now is the whole "what will people think" is one of the most abusive things we do to ourselves as humans. Don't play that game. Don't let anybody's opinions ever have any power over you being your authentic self.
What's the key to living an authentic life? Because I think I know so many people, self included, who struggle with that. Because we do let the perceptions of others and kind of expectations of, let's say, family or
Mhm.
the culture we were raised in, the religions we were raised in. Um, we do kind of let those, as many of us let those kind of rule the roost for a period of time anyway. What's the key to living more authentically?
I mean, you hear all those things, and this is not my quote, but the whole idea of who are you before the world told you who to be, right? And we hear these things and they sound great. And what I learned is until you actually really fully put it into practice and reap the benefits of genuinely being authentic and not allowing other people's opinions to, you know, change who you are, until you really feel those benefits, which thankfully I have, it's going to be a really hard game because we are all brainwashed from a young age to care what people think, to be people pleasers, right? To make sure that everybody likes us and that they see us as respectful and as good and as obedient as this and that, right? And I actually touch on it in this new book how it affected my parenting because what will other people think about the fact that there's a police guard handcuffing my kid and taking him away? I was in a new neighborhood, by the way, so I'm like, these people don't even know me. What do they think of my family? Um, or the fact that my kid is acting this way. Well, the way I was raised, parents are supposed to know how to control this, and just like all those things, all those messages that were in my head, I had to just shed it all in order to A, stay sane during a really hard time in my life, and B, in order to actually be the best support system for my child. And so once I was able to do that and I saw the benefits of living a life where I get to just be my favorite self and not worry whether my favorite self is everybody else's favorite self, gosh, there's nothing more free.
Yeah, but that takes courage. It really does. To shed those exterior, I don't know, those perceptions that. I don't know. I'm tripping over my words now, but I just think about like my own life. What would people think if I did this, which is really what I want to do, but instead, you know what, I'm going to do that because this is what's expected of me. It's hard. It's not easy.
It's not easy, but I really think that most things in life that I have benefit from, like really, now look back and go, "Oh my gosh, I would never go back to that." They all required courage. They all required courage. I think if it was easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Because nobody would care what people think. And to me, I remember when I was really still struggling with it, I would always ask myself, "Who are these people, by the way? Who are these people whose opinion I'm worried about? Are they the type of people that I would actually go to for advice and I really admire and I want their life because they're perfect and they have it all figured out?" No, no, they're just as flawed, if not more flawed than me. So why am I worrying about their opinion? And so just sort of reminding myself, like, who are these people? Why do they have so much power over me? I get this one life. I get this one life on this earth. I want to do it my way. Not to quote a song.
No, I like it. I mean, you'd either be quoting Frank Sinatra or John Bon Jovi quoting Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, both. I was doing both, actually.
Maybe throw in a little Jerry Seinfeld in there because you did say, "Who are these people?"
Sure.
Well, this has been a fun conversation, Kristina, and I do want to thank you for stopping by, uncorking a story, and letting me uncork yours.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlon uncork a new story.